Welcome. You're listening to Living Faith Podcast.
Starry skies, see your hand in time, in mine to lead me through the night.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to continue with our series, Jesus Beneath the Surface. Jesus described himself in John 15:5 as the true vine, or the source, and you and I are the branches. Now, if you've done any gardening, you know that the vine is what provides nutrients to the branches, the leaves, and eventually the fruit of the plant. The leaves and the fruit can't provide for themselves and are completely reliant on the vine as their source. In fact, as soon as you take a leaf or a branch, or even the fruit away from the vine, that will begin to wither and die. And you and I, as children of God, if we find ourselves losing our connection with Jesus as our source, it won't be long before we will find ourselves withering away. When I was asked recently to share past experiences with you regarding the Lord as being my source over the years, I found my mind was flooded with memories. In fact, I quickly realized that the challenge would be in keeping them to just a few. So let me start here. I had no connection to God until the age of about 13. I remember a knock on the door. A children's ministry team invited me my brother and I, to Sunday school. We went, and as of February 28th of this year, that marked 40 years of walking with the Lord. I'm very grateful for that. In my time on this earth, I've lived a number of places across this great nation. It seemed that my family was always on the move to the next job. My parents worked very hard to supply for my brother and I, and sometimes now I understand as a parent, you need to make some tough choices, and sometimes you just have to go where the work is. My first real memory of God stepping in and showing me that he was in control and was the source of things in my life was just after I had turned 13. My dad had recently been laid off from work. My mother was working a part-time job, and we found ourselves with very, very little money and hardly any food in the house, wondering how the bills were going to be covered and were we going to have money to have the heat turned back on. The days of the ketchup sandwich and using a cube of beef bouillon to make a fake soup in a cup of hot water. Those are some of the memories that I've had. During that time, I remember hearing my mother in the basement praying to God for help. Nothing specific that I remember her asking for, just her tears and her voice crying for help. And as a kid, and being new to this Jesus thing, in attending Sunday school, I heard the stories, like many of you have, of the prophets and how the Lord provided for them. And so part of me was kind of wondering, well, Mom's praying, so when do the crows show up with muffins and hamburgers, and when do the cabinets and the refrigerators suddenly magically fill with groceries? Little did I know that God had another plan in mind, and in that plan, a lesson for me that would stick with me to this day. You see, he was and is the source, and he uses and used then others to meet the needs of our family. He spoke to someone's heart, and they bought a ton of groceries and left them on our doorstep, knocked on the door and walked away. We never, to this day, have no idea who that was. There was someone who pressed an envelope full of money and a note to my parents into my palm during a busy church service. I don't know who it was, but it helped us keep the lights on and the heat in the house. The lesson that this taught me was that the Lord doesn't always meet our needs in the way that you and I may expect him to. And that I, as his child, I need to be sensitive and willing to step out and allow him to meet someone's need through the blessings that he has provided to me. Now, he remains the source, but he wants you and I to play an active role in being the branches and the leaves that will eventually help produce the fruit. So, some examples. of when the Lord proved to be my source of many different things throughout my life. I have to go back to a dark period in my life when I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. The Lord came through all of that and proved himself to be a source of light that I found myself leaning towards and eventually ran towards. And he pulled me out of that. When I was 15 years old, I was run over by a car. I happened to be a classmate of mine who did it accidentally, and I found myself laying on the side of the road with a ruptured spleen and floating kidney and bleeding internally. The Lord proved himself to be a source of miraculous healing that took place in just a matter of a couple of days. Blew the doctor's minds. He's been there when I've done stupid, foolish things as a young man, like jumping from the top of an oil rig helipad in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico into the water, 70 feet in the air, or riding my motorcycle like a madman through the streets of New Orleans. And he proved to be my protector. Even though I was at the time running from him, he proved to be a source of protection for me. I remember during the loss of a pregnancy, he showed my wife and I that he was indeed a source of comfort when there just weren't any words or answers to be had. I also recognize him as a source of my joy when my wife and I did finally have children, and eventually we had grandchildren, and continue to be a joy in our lives. And even now, on occasion, when I find myself lying awake at night, maybe worrying about my job or my children's futures, what they're going to do, or if I'm ever going to get out of this house and get it sold, he sweeps in as my source of peace and reminds me that, you know what, Don, I'm in control. And so these are just a few examples of the many, many I could provide, but the point I'd like to make here is this: that he was and always will be my source. He is in control. Like the vine, eventually winter comes and the fruit is gone, the leaves dry up and they fall to the ground, but that vine remains. And when the season changes again, spring arrives, that vine is still there, and in short time the leaves come back bright and green and the fruit is just as sweet as the year before. Today, I recognize that we find ourselves in a difficult time. The world is rife with fear and worry about the economy, about the health of each other, and how things are going to look when this virus runs its course. And, it's easy to become uneasy. But instead, can you and I agree to make an extra effort to develop a deeper relationship with Jesus during this time? Maybe we can strive to become more connected to the source so that we can be used of him to meet the needs of others. Today, I'd like to leave you with this encouragement. Be a blessing to your neighbor, a coworker, or a random person that you might find yourself standing 6 feet away from at the grocery store. See what kind of a blessing you can be in their life and how that can bless you. Folks, we're all in this together. And with Jesus as our source, I've got a feeling that everything's going to be all right. Stay faithful. God bless you.
You've been listening to the Living Faith Everett podcast series. Tune in next week for the next part of this series, or join us online at LivingFaithMinistries.church.
And the Holy Ghost